The wagon wheel cracked against a jagged stone, and Sarah Mitchell felt the jolt shoot straight through her swollen belly, making her gasp as tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. She gripped the weathered wooden seat beneath her, knuckles white, her other hand instinctively cradling the life growing inside her as the wagon lurched forward on the narrow mountain trail. The pain radiating from her lower back had become unbearable over the past 3 hours, spreading like wildfire up her spine with every bump and sway. Her wedding dress, once pristine white satin ordered all the way from St. Louis, now bore the dust and grime of 2 days' hard travel through the Colorado Rockies in late summer of 1876. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, her voice barely audible over the creaking wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves. The driver, a hired man named Chester, who smelled of tobacco and indifference, hadn't spoken to her in miles. He had been paid to deliver her to the mining town of Silver Creek, where her intended husband Thomas Weatherby waited, a man she had never met but whose letters had promised her security and respectability. Sarah was 22 years old and 3 months pregnant with another man's child. The tears came harder now, though she tried to hold them back. Everything hurt. Her back throbbed with each breath, her feet were swollen inside her delicate shoes, and her heart ached with a grief so profound, she sometimes wondered if she might drown in it. Just 4 months ago, she'd been engaged to Daniel Crawford, a charming banker's son in Independence, Missouri. They had been so desperately in love, stealing kisses in her father's garden, making plans for their future. Then came the night they had given in to their passion, unable to wait for the wedding they had already planned for autumn. 2 weeks later, Daniel had been thrown from his horse during a storm and died before the doctor could reach him. Another violent bump sent agony lancing through Sarah's spine, and she couldn't suppress the cry that tore from her throat. Chester glanced back at her with annoyance, but said nothing, just spat a stream of tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. When her condition had become apparent, the scandal had been immediate and devastating. Her father, a respected Methodist minister, had wept with shame. Her mother had barely looked at her. The whispers had followed her everywhere through town, the pointing fingers, the sudden silence when she entered a room. Thomas Weatherby's letter had arrived like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. He was a widower, he wrote, lonely in the mountains, willing to take a bride sight unseen. Her father had written to him explaining the situation, and Thomas had agreed to the arrangement anyway. He needed a wife, she needed a husband. It was practical, he had assured her in his correspondence. He would raise the child as his own. Sarah had no choice but to accept. The trail grew steeper, winding higher into the mountains where pine trees towered like sentinels, and the air grew thin and cold despite the August sun. Sarah shifted on the hard seat, trying desperately to find a position that might ease the relentless pain in her back. Nothing helped. The baby pressed against her spine, or perhaps it was simply the strain of the journey, the stress of her circumstances, the weight of her shame and sorrow, all manifesting in physical agony. "How much farther?" she managed to ask, her voice strained. "Few hours yet," Chester grunted. "Trail gets rougher from here." Sarah wanted to weep at the thought of more hours like this, but she had no tears left. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but even that brought no comfort. She felt so utterly alone. The sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind made Chester pull the wagon to the side of the narrow trail. Sarah opened her eyes to see a rider coming around the bend, and her breath caught in her throat. The man sat astride a massive bay horse with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. He was enormous, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with arms corded with muscle visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his rough cotton shirt. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a thick beard covered his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held her attention, a startling blue-gray that seemed to take in everything at once, sharp and intelligent and surprisingly kind. He slowed as he approached, and Sarah saw the rifle strapped to his saddle, the knife at his belt, the weathered leather chaps that spoke of countless days in the wilderness. This was a man who lived in these mountains, who knew them intimately, who had been shaped by their harshness into something equally hard and unyielding. "Chester," the man said, his voice a deep rumble. "That you?" "Garrett," Chester acknowledged with a nod. "Heading down to Silver Creek with a passenger." The mountain man's gaze shifted to Sarah, and she saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in her obvious pregnancy, her tear-stained face, the fine fabric of her dress so incongruous in this wild setting. Something flickered in his expression, concern perhaps, or curiosity. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat with a respect that made Sarah's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with anything other than judgment or pity. "Sir," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrett's eyes narrowed as he studied her more closely. "You all right, madam? You look like you're hurting." The simple kindness in his question nearly undid her. Sarah opened her mouth to assure him she was fine, but instead, a small sob escaped. "My back," she admitted, pressing her hand to the source of the pain. "The road is so rough, and I cannot seem to find any relief." Garrett's jaw tightened, and he swung down from his horse with a fluid grace that belied his size. He was even larger standing on the ground, at least 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle, his presence commanding and somehow reassuring. He walked to the wagon and looked up at Chester with an expression that made the driver shift uncomfortably. "How long's she been hurting?" Chester shrugged. "Complained a few times. Women in her condition do that." "She's been crying," Garrett said, and there was steel in his voice now. "How long you been pushing her without stopping for rest?" "Got a schedule to keep. Weatherby's expecting her by nightfall." "Thomas Weatherby." Garrett's eyebrows rose, and his gaze returned to Sarah with new understanding and something that looked like sympathy. "You're his mail-order bride?" Sarah flinched at the term but nodded. "I am to be married upon arrival in Silver Creek." Garrett was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. Sarah found herself unable to look away, caught by the intensity of his regard. She saw intelligence there, and strength, and a surprising gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Chester, there's a clearing about a quarter-mile ahead," Garrett said finally. "Good water, level ground. You're going to stop there and let the lady rest properly before you push on. Now see here, I got a job to do. You've got a pregnant woman in pain, and you're going to show some Christian decency or answer to me for it. Your choice." The threat was delivered calmly, but there was no mistaking the promise behind it. Chester paled slightly and nodded. "The clearing it is." Garrett turned back to Sarah, and his expression softened. "Madam, I know it's not proper, me being a stranger and all, but I've got some experience with helping folks who are hurting. My ma was a midwife, taught me some things about easing pain, especially for women carrying. If you'd allow it, I might be able to help with your back." Sarah knew she should refuse. It was completely inappropriate for an unmarried woman to accept such an offer from a strange man, especially when she was already ruined in the eyes of society. But the pain was so severe, and there was something in Garrett's eyes that made her trust him, despite every reason not to. "I would be grateful," she whispered. The clearing was just where Garrett had said it would be, a small meadow beside a clear stream where wildflowers bloomed in defiant splashes of color against the green grass. Chester unhitched the horses to water them, and Garrett helped Sarah down from the wagon with surprising gentleness, his large hands steady at her waist. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and Garrett caught her easily, supporting her weight as if she were no burden at all. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been sitting too long. Let the blood flow back into your legs." Sarah clung to his arms, feeling the solid muscle beneath her hands, the warmth of his body through the fabric of his shirt. She was acutely aware of how close he was, how safe she felt in his presence, despite knowing nothing about him. It made no sense, but she didn't question it. When she could stand steady, Garrett released her, though he stayed close. "I'm going to spread my bedroll over there by that tree. The ground's soft there, and you can lie down proper while I work on your back. Nothing improper, I swear it. Just trying to help ease your pain." Sarah nodded, too exhausted and hurting to worry about propriety anymore. She watched as Garrett retrieved a thick bedroll from his horse and spread it carefully in the shade of a massive pine tree. He helped her walk to it, his hand at her elbow, steadying her when she stumbled. "Lie down on your side," he instructed gently, "whichever feels most comfortable." Sarah lowered herself onto the bedroll with a sigh of relief. The ground was infinitely better than the wagon seat, and the soft padding beneath her was a luxury she hadn't expected. She settled on her left side, her belly supported by the earth, and felt some of the pressure ease immediately. Garrett knelt behind her, and Sarah tensed despite herself. She could feel the heat of his presence, hear his steady breathing. "I'm going to touch your shoulders now," he said quietly. Just going to see where the worst of the pain is. You tell me if anything I do hurts worse, understand?" "Yes," Sarah breathed. His hand settled on her shoulders, and Sarah nearly gasped at the sensation. His palms were calloused and warm, large enough that they covered her shoulders completely. He began to press gently, exploring the muscles of her upper back with a careful deliberation that spoke of knowledge and experience. "Your shoulders are tight as bowstrings," he murmured, "all knotted up. That's making the pain in your lower back worse, pulling everything out of alignment." "Can you help?" Sarah asked, hating the desperate note in her voice. "I can help," Garrett assured her. "Going to start gentle, just working out some of these knots. You breathe deep and try to relax." His thumbs began to move in slow circles against her shoulders, applying steady pressure that made Sarah wince at first. The muscles were so tight they hurt to touch, but as Garrett continued his methodical work, she felt something begin to shift. The tension that had been building for days, maybe weeks, started to release under his skilled hands. "That's it," Garrett said softly. "Just breathe." Sarah closed her eyes and focused on the sensation of his hands moving across her shoulders, down to her shoulder blades, working out knots she hadn't even known were there. The pain didn't disappear, but it began to transform into something else, a release that was almost as intense as the original discomfort, but infinitely more bearable. "You're carrying a lot of weight," Garrett observed, his voice quiet and non-judgmental. "Not just the baby. A lot of worry, a lot of fear. It all settles in the muscles, makes everything tighter." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes again, but these were different somehow. "I have much to worry about. I expect you do." His hands moved lower, carefully avoiding anything improper, but working the muscles of her mid-back with the same patient attention. "Thomas Weatherby's not a bad man, if that's what concerns you. Known him a few years. He's honest, works hard, lost his wife and baby boy 2 winters back to fever." "I did not know about the child," Sarah whispered. The information made her heart ache for the man she was to marry, even as it terrified her. Would he resent her baby, a constant reminder that his own son was gone? "He doesn't talk about it much," Garrett said. "Grief hit him hard. That's why he sent for a bride, I reckon. House too empty, memories too heavy." "And he knows about my condition? About the baby?" "If your father wrote to him honest, then yes. Thomas isn't the kind to go back on his word once it's given." Garrett's hands moved to her lower back now, and Sarah tensed reflexively. This was where the worst pain lived, a constant throbbing ache that never quite left her. But Garrett was careful, his touch gentle as he explored the tight muscles on either side of her spine. "Baby's pressing on a nerve," he said quietly. "That's what's causing the worst of it. And the wagon ride made everything inflamed. I can help some, but you need real rest, not hours more of being jolted around." "I must reach Silver Creek tonight," Sarah said, though the thought of getting back in that wagon made her want to weep. "Thomas is expecting me. The minister has been arranged." Garrett was silent for a moment, his hands still working methodically at the knotted muscles. "What's your name, madam? Seems wrong to be helping you like this without knowing what to call you." "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." "I'm Garrett Stone. I've got a cabin about 3 miles from here, up in the high country. Built it myself 5 years back. It's rough but comfortable, and there's a proper bed. You could rest there tonight, get your strength back, and I could take you into Silver Creek tomorrow when you're better able to handle the journey." The offer was both tempting and completely impossible. "I could not. It would not be proper. I am to be married." "I know it. I'm not suggesting anything improper, Miss Sarah, just offering you a place to rest that isn't the hard ground or that damned wagon. Chester can go on ahead. Tell Thomas you'll be arriving tomorrow. I give you my word as a man of honor that nothing will happen except you getting the rest you need." Sarah wanted to say no. Every rule of society she had been raised with screamed that accepting such an offer was madness, scandal upon scandal. But those same rules had already abandoned her, left her pregnant and alone and desperate enough to marry a stranger. And Garrett's hands on her back were the first kindness anyone had shown her in months, the first touch that had eased her pain instead of adding to it. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Garrett's hands paused for a moment, then resumed their gentle massage. Because you look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on these shoulders, and because I can see you're scared and hurting and trying so hard to be brave. Because my ma taught me that when you see someone suffering and you have the means to help, you help. Simple as that. A sob caught in Sarah's throat, and then the tears came in earnest, months of grief and fear and loneliness pouring out of her in great shaking waves. She pressed her face into the bedroll and wept, her whole body trembling with the force of her emotions. Garrett didn't stop his gentle ministrations. His hands continued to work at her shoulders, her back, providing a steady anchor as she fell apart. He didn't tell her to stop crying, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just stayed there, solid and present, letting her release the storm that had been building inside her. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah felt hollowed out but somehow lighter, as if she had set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. The pain in her back had eased to a dull ache, manageable for the first time in days. "Better?" Garrett asked softly. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Thank you. I'm sorry for that display." Nothing to apologize for. Sometimes tears are the only way to let the poison out. Sarah rolled onto her back carefully, looking up at Garrett through swollen eyes. His face was kind, his expression open and concerned. She realized with a start that he was quite handsome beneath the beard and the weathered skin, in a rough-hewn way that was entirely different from Daniel's polished attractiveness. There was something elemental about Garrett Stone, something that felt as permanent and unmovable as the mountains themselves. "I will accept your offer," she said, making the decision even as the words left her mouth. "If Chester agrees to go ahead and explain to Mr. Weatherby." Garrett's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire appearance, warming those cool gray-blue eyes. "I'll make sure Chester agrees. You just rest there a minute while I talk to him." Sarah watched as Garrett stood and walked over to where Chester was watering the horses. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Chester's initial resistance, saw Garrett's hand rest meaningfully on the knife at his belt, saw Chester's shoulders slump in defeat. A few minutes later, Chester was hitching up the horses again, and Garrett was pressing coins into his hand. "For the inconvenience," Garrett said loudly enough for Sarah to hear, "and for making sure Thomas Weatherby knows Miss Sarah is safe and will arrive tomorrow, rested and well. You understand?" "I understand," Chester muttered, pocketing the coins. He didn't look at Sarah as he climbed back onto the wagon and drove away, leaving her alone with a strange man in the wilderness. Sarah waited for fear to come, but it didn't. Instead, she felt only relief and a strange sense of rightness, as if this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Garrett returned to her side and knelt down. "How's the pain now?" "Much better, though still present. It'll come back if you move too much, so we're going to take this slow. My cabin's about an hour's ride if we go easy. You'll ride my horse with me, and I'll make sure you're comfortable as can be." "I have never ridden a horse," Sarah admitted, feeling foolish. Garrett's smile was gentle. "Then you'll learn today, though mostly you'll just be holding on to me and letting the horse do the work. Can you manage that?" The thought of sitting pressed against Garrett's broad back for an hour sent a flutter through Sarah's stomach that had nothing to do with the baby. "I can try." Getting Sarah onto the horse proved to be a challenge, but Garrett was patient and strong. He mounted first, then reached down and lifted Sarah as if she weighed nothing, settling her in front of him on the saddle. His arms came around her to hold the reins, caging her in warmth and solid muscle and the scent of pine and leather and something uniquely masculine. "You all right?" Garrett asked, his voice rumbling against her back. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She was more than all right. She was safe, wrapped in the protection of this mountain man's embrace, and for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt like she might actually survive what lay ahead. The ride to Garrett's cabin was slow and careful, the horse picking its way along a trail so faint, Sarah would never have seen it on her own. Garrett kept up a quiet commentary, pointing out landmarks, talking about the mountains and the wildlife and the changing seasons. His voice was soothing, and Sarah found herself relaxing against him, her head resting just below his chin. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked at one point. Garrett was quiet for a moment. "I like the solitude. I like being able to see for miles without seeing another soul. I like knowing the only sounds I'll hear are the wind and the water and the animals. Down in the towns, there's too much noise. Too many people trying to tell you how to live. Up here, I answer to no one but myself and God. Do you not get lonely? Sometimes, Garrett admitted, but lonely's different from alone. I've been in crowds of people and felt lonelier than I ever do up here. Sarah understood that more than she could say. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled in a small valley between two peaks. It was larger than Sarah had expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows that glinted in the afternoon sun. A small barn stood nearby, and a garden plot showed neat rows of vegetables growing in the thin mountain soil. You built all this yourself? Sarah asked in wonder. Over 5 years, bit by bit. It's home. Garrett dismounted and helped Sarah down with the same gentle care he had shown all afternoon. Her back protested the movement, but it was nothing like the agony of earlier. She stood on shaky legs and looked around, taking in the breathtaking view of mountains stretching endlessly in every direction. It is beautiful, she whispered. It is that, Garrett agreed. Come on, let's get you inside and off your feet. The interior of the cabin was neat and surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area beside it. A handmade table and chairs sat near the windows. Shelves lined the walls, holding books and supplies, and in the far corner stood a real bed frame with what looked like a feather mattress and quilts. You can take the bed, Garrett said. I'll sleep on the floor tonight. I cannot take your bed, Sarah protested. You can and you will. Now sit down here at the table and I'll make you something to eat. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days. Sarah sank into one of the chairs gratefully and watched as Garrett moved around his kitchen with easy competence. He built up the fire, set water to boil, sliced bread and cheese and cold venison. His movements were efficient and practiced, the hands that had so gently massaged her back now handling a knife with casual expertise. How did you learn to help with pain like you did? Sarah asked. Garrett glanced at her with a slight smile. Told you my ma was a midwife. She delivered babies all over the Missouri Territory when I was growing up. I'd go with her sometimes, help however I could. She taught me that carrying a baby puts strain on a woman's body in ways most men don't understand or appreciate. Taught me how to ease some of that strain. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Died 6 years back, fever took her. My pa had already passed, so I sold the farm and headed west. Ended up here. I'm sorry for your loss. Garrett set a plate in front of her, piled high with food. Life takes from all of us. Question is what we do with what's left. Now eat. You need to keep your strength up for that baby. The food was simple but delicious, and Sarah realized she was ravenous. She ate everything Garrett gave her, then accepted seconds with only a slight blush. He seemed pleased by her appetite, his eyes warm with approval. After the meal, Garrett heated water and poured it into a basin. You'll want to wash the trail dust off, he said. I'll step outside and give you privacy. There's a clean shirt of mine on the bed you can wear to sleep in. Be more comfortable than that dress. Don't worry about what's proper, just worry about getting rest. He disappeared outside before Sarah could thank him, and she was left alone in the warm cabin with the basin of hot water and the promise of clean comfort. She washed as best she could, stripping off the travel-stained wedding dress and the restrictive undergarments, sponging away days of grime and sweat. The hot water felt like heaven against her skin. Garrett's shirt was enormous on her, falling past her knees, the shoulders hanging loose. But it was soft from many washings and smelled clean, with a faint hint of pine that she was coming to associate with the man himself. Sarah climbed into the bed and nearly wept at the comfort of it. The mattress cradled her aching body. The quilts were warm without being heavy, and the pillow smelled of fresh air and sunshine. She was asleep almost before her head settled, exhaustion pulling her down into darkness. Sarah woke hours later to find the cabin dim with evening light and her back throbbing again. She tried to shift position to find some relief, but the pain had returned with a vengeance. A small whimper escaped her before she could stop it. The door opened, and Garrett stepped inside, his arms full of firewood. He took one look at her face and set the wood down quickly. Pain's back? Sarah nodded, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. I'm sorry to be such trouble. You're no trouble at all. Garrett crossed to the bed and knelt beside it. Roll onto your side, same as before. I'll work on those muscles again. See if I can't ease it enough for you to sleep through the night. Sarah did as instructed, and Garrett's hands settled on her shoulders with the same gentle confidence as before. He worked in silence for a while, his thumbs finding the knots and working them loose with patient pressure. Sarah felt herself relaxing under his touch, the pain gradually subsiding into something bearable. "Tell me about him," Garrett said quietly. "The baby's father." Sarah stiffened, but Garrett's hands never paused their soothing motion. "I do not wish to speak of it. Sometimes speaking of things helps, and I'm not here to judge you, Sarah. Lord knows I've made my share of mistakes." Perhaps it was the darkness of the room, or the intimacy of his hands on her body, or simply the need to finally tell someone the truth. Whatever the reason, Sarah found herself speaking. "His name was Daniel. We were engaged to be married. I loved him more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Her voice broke, but she pushed on. "We were young and foolish, and we thought we had forever. So we did not wait, and I became pregnant. Before I could even tell him about the baby, he was killed in an accident." Garrett's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their gentle massage. "I'm sorry. That's a hard loss to bear." "My father said it was God's judgment on our sin," Sarah whispered. "My mother could not even look at me. The whole town whispered and pointed. When Thomas Weatherby's letter came, my father practically forced me onto the train west. I am ruined, you see. No decent man would have me. But Thomas is desperate enough for a wife that he is willing to overlook my shame." "That's a lot of weight for one person to carry," Garrett said softly. "But I don't think you're ruined, Sarah. I think you're a woman who loved deeply and lost tragically, and there's no shame in that. The baby is innocent, and you're brave for choosing to bring life into the world even when everything else was falling apart around you." Sarah turned her head to look at him, and in the dim light she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "You truly believe that?" "I do." His hand came up to gently brush a tear from her cheek, the gesture so tender it made Sarah's heart ache. "And I think Thomas Weatherby's getting a far better deal than he deserves, taking you for a wife." They stared at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Garrett's eyes dropped to her lips and she saw him swallow hard. Then he pulled back, breaking the spell. "You should sleep now. I worked out the worst of the knots. Should hold you through the night." "Garrett," Sarah said, catching his hand before he could rise, "thank you for everything, for your kindness, for not judging me, for helping me when you had no reason to." His hand turned in hers, his rough palm pressing against her softer one. "I had reason enough. Sometimes we meet people who need help, and if we're smart, we give it. And sometimes we meet people who make us want to be better than we are." He squeezed her hand gently. "Sleep now, Sarah. Tomorrow's soon enough for whatever comes next." He withdrew, and Sarah watched him move to the other side of the cabin where he had laid out his bedroll near the fire. He settled onto it with his back to her, giving her privacy, and Sarah felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Longing, perhaps, or regret for what could never be. She was to be married tomorrow to a man she had never met. This interlude with Garrett Stone was just that, an interlude, a brief moment of kindness in a hard journey. She needed to remember that. But as she drifted back to sleep, it was Garrett's face she saw in her dreams, not Thomas Weatherby's. It was Garrett's hands she felt on her skin, Garrett's voice she heard whispering words of comfort. And when she woke in the deep night with tears on her cheeks, she knew with devastating clarity that she had made a terrible mistake. She had been falling in love with the mountain man who had rubbed her shoulders until she slept, and tomorrow she would marry someone else. The realization sat in her chest like a stone as dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah lay in the bed that smelled of Garrett and watched the light creep across the cabin floor. She could hear him moving around outside, probably tending to his horse or chopping wood, doing the morning chores that shaped his solitary life. A life she wanted desperately to be part of, she realized with a shock. It made no sense. She had known Garrett Stone for less than a day. She was pregnant with another man's child. She was promised to Thomas Weatherby, who was expecting her today, who had offered her respectability and security when no one else would. Every practical consideration screamed that she needed to go through with the wedding to make the best of the situation she found herself in. But her heart, her traitorous heart, wanted something else entirely. Sarah rose from the bed slowly, her back stiff, but no longer in acute pain. Garrett's ministrations had worked wonders. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then reluctantly put her wedding dress back on. The fabric felt all wrong now, too fine and too false, a costume for a role she no longer wanted to play. When she emerged from the cabin, she found Garrett by the barn, brushing down his horse. He looked up at her approach, and his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in the white dress. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "I look like a fraud," Sarah replied before she could stop herself. Garrett set down the brush and walked toward her, his expression concerned. "What's wrong?" "Everything," Sarah wanted to say. "I do not want to marry Thomas Weatherby. I want to stay here with you, in this cabin in the mountains, and build a life that makes sense even though it should not. I want your hands on my shoulders every night and your voice in my ears every morning. I want to know what it feels like to be loved by a man like you." But she said none of that. Instead, she forced a smile. "Nothing. I'm just nervous about meeting my intended husband." Garrett studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her lie. "If you don't want to go through with this, you don't have to. I meant what I said yesterday. I don't think you're ruined. You've got options." "What options?" Sarah asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Return to independence in shame? Raise my baby alone with no means of support? Thomas Weatherby is my only option, and we both know it. You could stay here." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and tempting. Sarah's heart leaped even as her mind rejected the suggestion. "I could not. I barely know you. You do not want a pregnant woman cluttering up your solitary existence." "What if I did?" Garrett took a step closer, his eyes intense. "What if I'm standing here thinking that I haven't been this happy to have another person in my space in 5 years? What if last night was the best night of sleep I've had in memory, just knowing you were safe and comfortable in my bed? What if I look at you in that dress and think Thomas Weatherby's the luckiest damn fool in Colorado, and I'd give anything to trade places with him?" Sarah's breath caught. "You do not mean that." "I mean every word." Garrett reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength in those large fingers. "I know it's crazy. I know we just met. But my ma used to say that sometimes you just know when something's right. And Sarah, this feels right. You being here feels right." "I am pregnant with another man's child," Sarah whispered, tears starting to fall. "I am a scandal, a ruined woman. I cannot offer you anything except shame and hardship. You can offer me yourself. And that's everything." Garrett's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I don't care about your past. I don't care what people in town might say. I care about you, about the woman I saw yesterday who was in so much pain but still tried to be brave. I care about giving you and your baby a home where you're wanted, not just tolerated." "This is madness," Sarah said, but her hand had come up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "You cannot possibly want this." "I want it more than I've wanted anything in a long time." "Question is, what do you want, Sarah? Not what you think you should want, not what your father wants, not what society says. What does your heart want?" Sarah looked up into those gray-blue eyes and felt something break open inside her chest. The truth spilled out before she could stop it. "I want to stay. I want to wake up in your cabin every morning and go to sleep every night knowing I am safe with you. I want to learn about these mountains and this life you have built. I want to see if this impossible thing I am feeling is real or just desperation making me foolish." "It's real," Garrett said fiercely. "I feel it too, Sarah, like I've been waiting my whole life for you to show up on that wagon, hurting and scared and needing exactly what I could give. But Thomas, I'll go to Silver Creek today. I'll explain to Thomas that you've changed your mind, that you won't be marrying him. I'll give him back whatever money he paid for your passage, and I'll make it clear that this was your choice, freely made. He will be angry. Let him be angry. He'll survive. Hell, he might even be relieved, deep down. A marriage that starts with one party desperate and the other resigned was never going to make either of you happy." Sarah knew he was right, but the fear was still there. What will people say? What will they think? They'll think whatever they're going to think regardless of what you do. You can spend your life trying to meet their expectations and still fall short, or you can live for yourself and damn the consequences. I learned that lesson when I came up here to these mountains. Best decision I ever made, until now. Until now? Garrett smiled, that transforming expression that made him look years younger. Until now, when I'm asking a beautiful woman to take a chance on a rough mountain man who doesn't have much to offer except a cabin and a strong back and a heart that suddenly remembered how to feel. Sarah felt answering smile curve her lips despite her tears. That sounds like rather a lot to me. Then say yes. Say you'll stay, at least for now. Give this a chance. See if what we're feeling is real. And if it's not, if you decide you made a mistake, I swear I'll take you anywhere you want to go with no hard feelings. It was the escape clause that decided her, the knowledge that Garrett was offering her a choice rather than trapping her in another obligation. For the first time since Daniel's death, someone was asking her what she wanted and promising to respect her answer. Yes, Sarah whispered. I will stay. Garrett's whoop of joy startled birds from the nearby trees. He swept Sarah up in his arms, lifting her clear off the ground despite her pregnancy, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh and gasp at the same time. When he set her down, his face was alight with happiness. You won't regret this, he promised. I'll take care of you, Sarah, you and the baby both, I swear it. I believe you, Sarah said, and realized she meant it. Garrett saddled his horse and prepared to ride to Silver Creek to speak with Thomas Weatherby. Sarah felt anxiety gnawing at her as she helped him pack, worried about how the confrontation might go, but Garrett seemed completely at ease. Thomas is a reasonable man, he assured her. Might be disappointed, but he'll understand. And between you and me, I think he's still so buried in grief over his wife that he's not really ready for another marriage anyway. This might be a kindness in the long run. I hope you are right. Garrett kissed her forehead, a gesture so sweet and natural it made Sarah's chest ache. I'll be back before dark. There's food in the larder and you should rest. Your back was better this morning, but you still need to take it easy. I will. Be safe. Sarah watched him ride away until he disappeared down the trail, then turned back to the cabin that was somehow already starting to feel like home. She spent the day exploring her new surroundings, taking in the neat efficiency of Garrett's housekeeping, the sturdy furniture he had built with his own hands, the shelves of books that spoke of an educated mind beneath the rough exterior. In the garden, she found herbs and vegetables thriving in the thin soil. In the barn, she discovered a small workshop where Garrett obviously spent time carving and building. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of a life lived with intention and care, a solitary existence that was nonetheless full and meaningful. And she was going to be part of it. The thought still seemed impossible, but with every hour that passed, Sarah felt more certain of her decision. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. Her back began to ache again in the late afternoon, and Sarah lay down on the bed, pressing her hand to her belly where the baby was moving. We are going to be all right, she whispered to the life growing inside her. We have found someone who wants us, who will protect us. Your father would have loved you so much, little one. But Garrett will too. I can feel it. The baby kicked in response, and Sarah smiled through her tears. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, the cabin door was opening and Garrett was striding inside, his face serious but not angry. Sarah sat up quickly, wincing as her back protested the sudden movement. What happened? How did Thomas react? Garrett knelt beside the bed and took her hands in his. He understood. Wasn't happy at first, got his pride hurt a bit, but once I explained that you needed to make your own choice and you'd chosen to stay with me, he settled down. I think he was actually relieved, if I'm honest. He admitted he'd been having second thoughts about the whole arrangement, felt like he was betraying his wife's memory. Relief flooded through Sarah. So he's not angry? Not really. I gave him back the money for your passage, and we shook hands like gentlemen. He wished you well, said to tell you he hopes you find happiness. I can scarcely believe it went so smoothly. Garrett smiled. I told you Thomas was reasonable. Now there's bound to be talk in town, folks wondering what happened to the mail-order bride who never showed up for her wedding. But up here, we're far enough away that it won't matter much. We can go into Silver Creek when we need supplies, but mostly we'll keep to ourselves." "That sounds perfect," Sarah said honestly. "There's one more thing." Garrett's expression became serious. "I want to do this right, Sarah. I know circumstances aren't conventional, but I want to marry you proper. Not because you need a husband or because I need a wife, but because I'm already falling in love with you and I want to build a real life together." Sarah's breath caught. "You cannot possibly love me. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and strong and kind. I know you make me want to be better. I know that when I rode into Silver Creek this morning, all I could think about was getting back here to you. That feels like love to me, or at least the beginning of it." "I think I am falling in love with you too," Sarah admitted, the words trembling out of her. "It terrifies me, but I cannot deny it. Then marry me, not today, not tomorrow, but soon, when you're ready. Let me give you and the baby my name and my protection, not out of obligation, but out of choice." Sarah leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle press of lips that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Garrett responded carefully, his hand coming up to cradle her face, his touch reverent. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "Yes," Sarah whispered, "yes, I will marry you." The next weeks passed in a haze of happiness Sarah had never expected to feel again. Garrett was true to his word, treating her with a respect and tenderness that made her fall more deeply in love with him every day. He continued to help with her back pain, his strong hands working out the knots and aches that came with her growing pregnancy. Those evening massages became a sacred ritual, a time when they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes and fears. Garrett taught her about life in the mountains, showing her how to identify edible plants, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the forest. Sarah shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her dreams for the future, her grief over Daniel that was slowly transforming into something softer, more like bittersweet memory than raw wound. "I will always love him," she told Garrett one night as he worked on her shoulders. "He was my first love, and he gave me this baby." "I know," Garrett said quietly, "and I would never ask you to forget him or stop loving him. There's room in your heart for both those feelings, the love you had and the love you're building. They don't cancel each other out." His understanding made Sarah love him even more. They rode down to Silver Creek 6 weeks after Sarah was supposed to marry Thomas Weatherby. She was 4 months pregnant now, her belly obvious beneath her simple calico dress. Garrett had made arrangements with the local minister, a kindly man named Reverend Morrison, who asked no questions about Sarah's condition or the unusual circumstances of their courtship. The wedding was simple, held in the small church with only Reverend Morrison and his wife as witnesses. Sarah wore a dress of deep blue that Garrett had bought for her from the general store, and Garrett had trimmed his beard and tied back his long hair. He looked almost civilized, though his rough hands and weathered face would never be mistaken for anything but what he was, a man of the wilderness. "Do you, Garrett Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Garrett said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Sarah Mitchell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Sarah looked up at Garrett, at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and felt tears of joy sting her eyes. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Garrett's kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Sarah melted into it, her hands resting on his broad chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. When they parted, she saw her own happiness reflected in his eyes. They were married. She was Sarah Stone now, wife of a mountain man, and she had never been happier. The ride back to the cabin was leisurely, Garrett holding her close as the horse picked its way along the familiar trail. Sarah rested against her husband's chest and watched the mountains roll past, feeling a peace she had thought was lost forever. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, his lips brushing her hair. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Sarah replied honestly. that I was so certain my life was over, and instead it was just beginning. We're both lucky, Garrett said. I was so sure I'd spend my whole life alone up here, and then you came along and made me realize what I was missing. Back at the cabin, Garrett carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests about her weight. He set her down gently and pulled her into another kiss, deeper this time, full of passion and promise. "I love you, Sarah Stone," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," Sarah whispered back, "more than I ever thought possible." That night, they truly became husband and wife. Garrett was gentle and patient, mindful of her pregnancy, his touch reverent as he worshipped her body with his hands and mouth. Sarah gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and found a joy and pleasure she had never known even with Daniel. This was different, deeper somehow, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than just youthful passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Garrett's large hand resting protectively on Sarah's belly. "When is the baby due?" "Late February or early March, I think," Sarah said. "I'm not entirely certain. We'll need to make sure we have plenty of supplies laid in before the worst of winter hits. And I want to get Doc Harris from Silver Creek to come up and check on you, make sure everything's progressing as it should." "You do not have to do all that," Sarah protested. "Yes, I do. You're my wife now, and that baby's going to be my child in every way that matters. I'm going to take care of both of you properly." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes again. "You're the best man I have ever known." "I'm just a man who loves his wife," Garrett said simply. "Now sleep. You need your rest." Sarah drifted off in his arms, safer and more content than she had been in months. The summer turned to autumn, and Sarah's belly grew rounder. Garrett was constantly attentive, never letting her overexert herself, always ready to help with the back pain that came and went. He built a cradle for the baby, carving intricate designs into the wood during the long evenings while Sarah knitted tiny clothes from soft wool. They talked about names, settling on Samuel if the baby was a boy, after Garrett's father, and Rose if it was a girl, after Sarah's grandmother. They made plans for the future, discussing whether to add on to the cabin, whether to get chickens in the spring, what crops to plant in the expanded garden. Doc Harris came to check on Sarah in October and pronounced her healthy and the baby thriving. "You've got good color and the baby's heartbeat is strong," he said. "Just take it easy, don't overdo things, and you should have a safe delivery." "I'll make sure she takes it easy," Garrett promised, and the doctor laughed. "I don't doubt it. You're about the most protective husband I've ever seen." As winter approached, Garrett laid in massive amounts of supplies, filling the cabin's storage with flour and sugar and coffee and preserved goods. He chopped enough firewood to last through 3 winters, stacked it neatly by the cabin. He checked and rechecked their stores, determined that Sarah and the baby would want for nothing. The first snow came in early November, transforming the mountains into a pristine white wonderland. Sarah stood at the window watching the flakes fall and felt Garrett's arms come around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly where the baby kicked and rolled. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Sarah replied honestly. She turned in his arms and looked up at him. "When I got on that wagon in Independence, I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to a loveless marriage with a stranger, that I would spend the rest of my days pretending to be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness I received. Instead, I found you. I found love and home and a future worth living." Garrett kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You gave me those same things. I didn't even realize how lonely I was until you showed up and filled all the empty spaces." The winter deepened, snow piling high around the cabin. They were isolated from the world, but neither minded. They had each other, and that was enough. Garrett kept the fire blazing, kept Sarah warm and comfortable and well-fed. He read to her from his collection of books, everything from Shakespeare to adventure novels to books on philosophy and natural history. Sarah's back pain worsened as her pregnancy advanced, and Garrett spent hours every evening massaging her shoulders and spine, his strong hands never tiring. He would rub her feet when they swelled, help her in and out of the bed when her bulk made it difficult, hold her when she cried from hormones or fear about the coming birth. "I am terrified," she admitted one night in late January, "the baby due in just weeks. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" "You can do this," Garrett said firmly. "You're the strongest woman I know, Sarah, and I'll be right here with you every moment. We'll get through this together." "What if the baby does not survive? What if I do not survive?" Garrett's jaw tightened. "Don't talk like that. You're both going to be fine. I won't accept any other outcome." But Sarah could see the fear in his eyes, the knowledge that childbirth was dangerous, and women died from it all the time, especially in isolated places like this where help was hours away. "Promise me," she whispered, gripping his hand. "If something happens to me, promise you will take care of the baby. Promise you will love them as your own." "I already love them as my own," Garrett said hoarsely. "But nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it." Sarah wanted to believe him, but the fear gnawed at her. In early February, Garrett rode down to Silver Creek and brought back Doc Harris, despite the doctor's protests about the weather and the difficulty of the journey. "My wife is due soon, and I want you here when it happens," Garrett said flatly. "I'll pay you double your usual fee to stay at our cabin until the baby comes." Doc Harris, a practical man who recognized both Garrett's determination and his ability to pay, agreed. He arrived at the cabin with his medical bag and a resigned expression, settling into the extra bedroll Garrett had prepared. "Could be days yet," he warned. "First babies often take their time." It was actually less than a week. Sarah woke in the pre-dawn hours of February 9th with a cramping pain low in her belly that she initially thought was just the usual discomfort of late pregnancy. But the pain came again, and again, settling into a regular rhythm that made her wake Garrett. "I think the baby is coming," she whispered. Garrett was up instantly, lighting lamps, waking Doc Harris, his face pale but determined. "What do you need me to do?" "Just be here," Sarah said, gripping his hand as another contraction rolled through her. "I need you here." "I'm not going anywhere," Garrett promised. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the day and into the night. Sarah had never known such pain, waves of it that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. She cried and screamed and begged for it to stop, and through it all Garrett stayed at her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement and love. Doc Harris worked efficiently, checking her progress, offering what comfort he could. But ultimately, this was something Sarah had to do herself, her body laboring to bring new life into the world. As the night deepened and her strength began to fail, Sarah felt despair creeping in. "I cannot do this anymore," she sobbed. "I cannot." "Yes, you can," Garrett said fiercely, his face close to hers. "You're almost there, Sarah, just a little more. You're so strong, so brave. I love you. Stay with me." His voice became her anchor, the only thing keeping her from drowning in the pain. She focused on his eyes, on the love she saw there, and found the strength to push when Doc Harris told her to bear down and fight through the agony. And then, impossibly, wonderfully, there was a thin wail splitting the air. "It's a boy," Doc Harris announced, holding up a tiny, squalling infant. "You've got a son, Mrs. Stone." Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but flooded with relief and joy. Garrett was laughing and crying at the same time, kissing her face, her hands, murmuring words of praise and love. Doc Harris cleaned and swaddled the baby, then placed him in Sarah's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered. "Welcome to the world, little one." Garrett reached out with one finger and gently touched the baby's impossibly small hand. Samuel's fingers wrapped around Garrett's finger instinctively, and Sarah saw her husband's face crumple with emotion. "He's perfect," Garrett said hoarsely. "You're perfect." "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for this gift." "Our gift," Sarah corrected softly. "Our son, because that's what Samuel was from that moment forward, Garrett's son in every way that mattered, raised with love and protection and devotion." Doc Harris stayed for a few more days to make sure Sarah was recovering properly, then accepted his generous payment and Garrett's heartfelt thanks, and made the journey back to Silver Creek. Sarah barely noticed his departure, too wrapped up in the wonder of her newborn son. Garrett proved to be a natural father, despite his lack of experience. He changed diapers and walked the floor with Samuel during the night, giving Sarah time to rest. He fashioned a sling so Sarah could carry the baby against her chest while still using her hands. He sang lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice that never failed to soothe the fussy infant. And every night, without fail, he massaged Sarah's shoulders and back, helping her body recover from the trauma of childbirth, easing the tension that came from hours of holding and feeding the baby. "I could not do this without you," Sarah told him one evening, as his hands worked magic on her aching muscles. "You could," Garrett said, "but you don't have to. That's what marriage is, Sarah. Being there for each other, carrying each other's burdens, sharing the joys and the sorrows." Winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal green shoots pushing through the earth. Samuel grew and thrived, his wrinkled newborn face smoothing into cherubic baby features. He had Daniel's dark hair, but Sarah's blue eyes, and watching him nurse or sleep filled her with bittersweet emotion. She wished Daniel could have known his son, but she was grateful beyond measure that Garrett had stepped into the role so completely. On a warm day in May, Sarah stood in the garden plot, Samuel sleeping in a basket in the shade while she planted seeds. Garrett was expanding the chicken coop they had built together, the sound of his hammer ringing through the clear mountain air. Sarah paused in her work and looked around at the cabin, the garden, the mountains rising in every direction, and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had been meant to find, even though the path to it had been dark and painful. Garrett looked up and caught her watching him. His face broke into that smile she loved, the one that made him look years younger, and he set down his hammer and walked over to her. "What are you thinking about?" "About how a year ago I was the most miserable person alive, and now I am the happiest," Sarah said honestly. "About how grateful I am that the wagon wheel broke that day, that we met, that you were brave enough to offer me a choice instead of just sending me on to Thomas Weatherby." Garrett pulled her into his arms, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Best broken wheel in history then, because you changed my life, Sarah. Made me realize I didn't have to live alone up here. Made me want to build something bigger than just a cabin, something that would last beyond my own lifetime." "What's that?" "A family, a legacy. Sons and daughters who'll remember these mountains and this life and carry it forward." Sarah's heart leaped. "Sons and daughters, plural?" Garrett grinned. "Well, Samuel's going to need siblings, isn't he? Assuming you want more children. No pressure if you don't. But I'd like to fill this cabin with love and laughter and the sound of little feet running around." "I would like that too," Sarah admitted. "Samuel's not even 4 months old yet, but already I find myself imagining him with brothers and sisters." "Then we'll give him that," Garrett promised. "We'll build the family neither of us thought we'd have." And they did. Over the next 5 years, Sarah gave Garrett 3 more children, a daughter named Rose, born in the spring of 1878, another son named James in 1879, and finally twins, a boy and girl they named Daniel and Grace, born in early 1881. The cabin was expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the mountains. Garrett proved to be a devoted father to all of them, making no distinction between Samuel and the children who carried his blood. He taught them all to ride and hunt and survive in the wilderness. He read to them every night, taught them letters and numbers, filled their heads with stories and knowledge. Sarah bloomed in motherhood, her earlier shame and sorrow transformed into confidence and joy. She became known in Silver Creek as the mountain woman with the beautiful family, the one who had made an unconventional choice and found happiness because of it. Sometimes people asked about Samuel, noting that he looked different from his siblings. Sarah would simply smile and say he took after her side of the family, and most people were polite enough not to push further. The few who knew the truth kept it to themselves, recognizing that the Stones were a family built on love rather than convention, and that was more important than any scandal. As the children grew, Sarah told Samuel the truth about his father, showing him the small collection of letters and the daguerreotype she had saved from Daniel. "Your papa loved you very much," she explained to the serious 8-year-old. "He would have been so proud of the boy you're becoming. But the man who raises you, who teaches you and protects you and loves you every single day, that's your father in every way that matters." Samuel looked at the picture of Daniel, then up at Sarah with his thoughtful blue eyes. "I'm glad Garrett is my father. He's the best father anyone could have." "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed, her heart full. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Sarah by taking her on a trip back to the clearing where they had first met, where he had first rubbed her aching shoulders, and she had first begun to fall in love with him. The older children were watching the younger ones, giving them a rare day alone together. They stood in the meadow, now familiar from dozens of family picnics and camping trips, and Garrett pulled Sarah into his arms. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, "choosing me instead of the respectable marriage you were supposed to have?" Sarah looked up at him, at the man who had saved her in every possible way, who had given her a love deeper than anything she had imagined, who had blessed her with 5 beautiful children and a life full of purpose and joy. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. You are my heart, Garrett Stone. You and our children are everything I never knew I needed." Garrett kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of the love that had only grown stronger over the years. When they parted, both were smiling. Both, "I love you, Sarah, today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left. I love you too, always." They stood there in the clearing as the sun set over the mountains, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ruins of Sarah's earlier life. Around them, the wilderness stretched endless and untamed, but they had carved out their own small paradise, a place where love mattered more than scandal, where family was defined by choice rather than blood, where a pregnant bride's tears had been soothed by a mountain man's gentle hands and transformed into a love story that would last a lifetime. Years later, when they were old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren, Sarah would still remember that first day with perfect clarity. The pain in her back, the tears on her face, the moment Garrett's hands had settled on her shoulders and begun to work out the knots. She would remember the first flickering of attraction, the growing realization that she was falling in love, the terror and exhilaration of choosing to stay with him instead of marrying Thomas Weatherby. And she would be grateful every single day for the broken wagon wheel that had brought her to exactly where she was supposed to be. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren, the story passed down through generations, the tale of how grandmother Sarah had come to the mountains as a desperate pregnant bride, and how grandfather Garrett had taken one look at her tears and decided to spend the rest of his life making sure she never had reason to cry from pain or sorrow again. How he had rubbed her shoulders until she slept, and in doing so, had won her heart. It became family legend, the kind of love story that children asked to hear over and over, that young couples aspired to emulate, because it proved that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. That love could bloom in the wilderness, nurtured by kindness and respect and genuine caring. That happy endings were possible even when all seemed lost. Samuel grew into a fine man, eventually marrying a girl from Silver Creek and starting his own family. He named his first son Daniel, honoring the father he never knew, and his second son Garrett, honoring the man who had raised him. Rose became a teacher, bringing education to the remote mountain communities. James took over the family homestead when Garrett and Sarah grew too old to manage it alone. And the twins, Daniel and Grace, remained close their entire lives, eventually settling near each other in the valley below the mountains. Through it all, Garrett and Sarah remained deeply in love, their bond strengthened by years of partnership in shared joys and weathered sorrows. Even as their bodies aged and weakened, they still found comfort in each other's touch. Garrett's hands, though gnarled with arthritis, still rubbed Sarah's shoulders every night until she drifted off to sleep. And Sarah's voice, though roughened by age, still whispered words of love and gratitude into the darkness. When Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Sarah grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given 42 years together, far more than many couples received, and she was grateful for every single day. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the mountains and the man who had built a life there with his own 2 hands. On the day she died, Sarah was found in her favorite chair by the window, looking out at the mountains she had come to love, a peaceful smile on her face. In her lap was the old photograph of Garrett taken on their wedding day, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, both of them young and full of hope for the future they were building together. They buried her next to Garrett on a hill overlooking the cabin, beneath towering pines where the wind sang through the branches and wildflowers bloomed every spring. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations standing together on the mountainside, testament to the love that had started with a chance meeting on a dusty trail. Samuel, now gray-haired himself, stood with his arm around his own son as the minister spoke. "She was the bravest woman I ever knew," he said quietly. "She could have chosen the safe path, the respectable path, but she chose love instead. She chose happiness, and she taught all of us that sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." "Tell us again how they met," one of the great-grandchildren asked, a little girl with Sarah's blue eyes. Samuel smiled and began the story that had been told so many times it had taken on the patina of myth, though every word was true. "Your great-great-grandmother came to these mountains on a wagon, pregnant and alone and scared. Her back hurt so badly she was crying, and no one seemed to care. Then along came your great-great-grandfather Garrett, the biggest, strongest man you ever saw, with a heart just as big as his muscles." The child listened with wide eyes as Samuel described how Garrett had insisted the wagon stop, how he had offered to help a woman he didn't know, how his gentle hands had eased her pain and begun the greatest love story the family had ever known. "And then what happened?" the little girl asked, even though she had heard the story dozens of times. "Then he rubbed her shoulders until she slept," Samuel said softly, "and when she woke up she knew she had found home." The family stood together on the mountain as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, saying goodbye to the woman who had chosen love over fear, who had built a legacy that would outlast her own life by generations. And in the whisper of the wind through the pines, they could almost hear 2 voices, young again and full of joy, promising to love each other today, tomorrow, and for all eternity. The cabin still stands on that mountain, preserved by the family as a monument to Garrett and Sarah's love. Visitors can see the bed where 5 children were born, the table where countless family meals were shared, the chair where Sarah used to sit and watch the mountains. And on the porch, there's a bench that Garrett carved, smooth and sturdy, where he and Sarah would sit together in the evenings, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, watching the sun go down over the wilderness they both loved. Above the door, carved into a wooden plaque that has weathered countless seasons, are the words Garrett inscribed shortly after they were married: "Love lives here." And it did, for 42 beautiful years, and in the hearts of all who came after. It still does. Because love like that doesn't die with the lovers. It echoes forward, inspiring each new generation to be brave enough to choose their own happiness, to take risks for love, to understand that sometimes the most broken roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. Sarah's story began with tears and pain and desperation, a young pregnant woman crying on a mountain trail with no hope and no future. But it ended with joy and love and a family that stretched across generations, all because one mountain man had the courage to offer kindness to a stranger, and one frightened woman had the courage to accept it. In the end, that's what love is: courage in the face of uncertainty, kindness in the face of pain, and the willingness to see past society's rules to the human heart beating underneath. Garrett and Sarah understood that, lived it every day of their marriage, and passed that understanding on to their children and their children's children. Their love story has become legend in those mountains, the kind of tale that makes people believe in destiny and second chances and the transformative power of genuine love. Young couples hike up to the cabin on their wedding days, seeking some of that legendary love for themselves. Families picnic in the meadow where Garrett first helped Sarah, telling their children about the importance of kindness to strangers. And on quiet nights, locals swear they can sometimes see 2 figures on the cabin porch, sitting close together, watching the stars come out over the mountains they called home. The pregnant bride who cried from back pain found more than relief in the mountain man's gentle hands. She found a future worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a happiness she never thought possible. And the solitary mountain man who offered to rub her aching shoulders found purpose and family, and a reason to believe that maybe he had been living alone all those years, just so he would be there on that exact day, at that exact moment, when a desperate woman needed him most. That's the magic of their story, the reason it endures and inspires. It proves that the right person at the right time can change everything. That kindness matters, that love conquers all, and that sometimes the best happily ever afters start with a simple act of compassion on a dusty mountain trail. Garrett and Sarah Stone lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that will never be forgotten. Their story reminds us all that it's never too late for happiness, never too broken to be fixed, never too lost to be found. All it takes is the courage to accept help when it's offered, the wisdom to recognize love when it appears, and the strength to choose your own path even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. They chose each other, built a life together in the wilderness, raised a family filled with love, and proved that the most unconventional beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Their love was tested by hardship and scandal and the harsh realities of frontier life, and it emerged stronger, deeper, more precious than gold. In the family Bible that now resides in a museum in Silver Creek, there's an entry in Garrett's distinctive handwriting, dated June 1876. "Today I met my wife. She doesn't know it yet, but I do. I've been waiting my whole life for her." And beneath it, added years later in Sarah's elegant script, "Today I understood what love really means. Not obligation or desperation, but choice. Every day I choose him. Every day he chooses me. That's the secret to forever." That's the secret they discovered together and shared with all who came after. Love is a choice made new each morning, a commitment renewed with each sunrise, a promise kept through years of joy and sorrow, health and sickness, plenty and want. It's gentle hands on aching shoulders, soothing pain until sleep comes. It's standing beside each other against the world's judgment. It's building a home in the wilderness and filling it with laughter and children and hope. Garrett and Sarah Stone's love story ended the way all the best love stories do, with two lives fully lived, two hearts completely given, two souls intertwined for eternity. They rest together on their mountain, beneath the pines and the endless sky, their legacy carried forward in the family they created and the love they shared. And somewhere in those mountains, on quiet summer evenings when the wind is just right, you can still feel it, the echo of a great love, the warmth of tender hands, the comfort of knowing that even in the darkest moments, kindness and courage can light the way home. The pregnant bride who cried from back pain found her mountain man. The mountain man who rubbed her shoulders until she slept found his purpose, and together they found forever.